The wooden floorboards creaked beneath Sarah's feet as she moved through the darkness. Every sound felt like thunder in her ears. Her heart hammered against her ribs so hard she was certain it would give her away. Behind the locked bedroom door, she could hear him snoring, deep, guttural sounds that had once meant safety but now meant only danger. 3 years. That's how long she had endured this nightmare. 3 years since she had arrived at the Whitmore trading post as a mail-order bride, full of hope for a new life on the frontier. The letters had been kind, promising. Reality had been something else entirely. Her hands trembled as she gathered the few possessions she could carry. A small leather pouch with $7 she had hidden in the flour jar. A knife from the kitchen. A canteen of water. The worn Bible her mother had given her before she died. Nothing else mattered. Nothing else could fit in the burlap sack she clutched to her chest. The bruises on her arms had turned from purple to yellow. They would fade, eventually. The ones on her soul would take longer. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw his face twisted in rage. She heard the sound of his belt striking the table when she served dinner too cold. She felt his fingers gripping her wrist until the bones felt like they would snap. She remembered the names he called her, the accusations, the blame for everything wrong in his miserable life. But tonight was different. Tonight, Thomas Whitmore had drunk more whiskey than usual. Tonight, he had finally passed out before he could lock her in the root cellar. Tonight, the impossible had become possible. Sarah paused at the back door. Through the small window, she could see the vast emptiness of the Kansas plains stretching endlessly under the moonlight. Out there was freedom. Out there was also death. She had no horse, no real supplies, no knowledge of the land. The nearest town was 40 miles east. The frontier was unforgiving to women alone. But staying meant certain death too. Just slower. More painful. More humiliating. Behind her, the snoring stopped. Her blood turned to ice. She held her breath, frozen in place like a deer sensing a wolf. 5 seconds passed. 10. 15. The silence stretched like torture. Then the snoring resumed, louder than before, accompanied by a wet cough. He was still drunk, still unconscious. Still the monster she had married. She couldn't wait any longer. Sarah eased the door open, wincing at every tiny sound. The spring air hit her face, cool and fresh. She had forgotten what free air tasted like. For 3 years, she had breathed only the stale, whiskey-soaked air of that house of cruelty. The moment her feet touched the prairie grass, something inside her broke open. Tears streamed down her face, but she didn't stop moving. She ran. Her worn boots slapped against the earth. The burlap sack bounced against her back. She ran until her lungs burned and her legs screamed for mercy. When she finally stopped, gasping for breath, she turned back. The trading post was a tiny square of yellow light in the vast darkness. She watched as that light suddenly blazed brighter. A lantern in the window. Then another. He was awake. He had discovered her gone. Sarah turned west and ran harder. The moon guided her across the endless grass. She had no plan beyond putting distance between herself and that house. Every shadow looked like a pursuer. Every sound made her jump. An owl called out, and she nearly screamed. A coyote howled somewhere in the distance, and she clutched the knife tighter. The prairie was alive with sounds she had never noticed from inside the trading post. Rustling grass. Distant animal calls. The wind singing across the open land. It was beautiful and terrifying in equal measure. Hours passed. Or maybe minutes. Time had lost all meaning. Her body moved on pure instinct now, driven by fear and desperate hope. She thought of stories she had heard. Stories of women who had tried to escape. Most were caught and brought back. Some were never seen again. A few, a precious few, had made it to freedom. She would be one of the few. She had to be. The alternative was unthinkable. Her feet ached. Her lungs burned. Her dress caught on thorns and tore. But she kept moving forward, always west, away from the rising sun that would soon expose her flight. As dawn began to paint the eastern sky with streaks of pink and gold, Sarah stumbled over a rise and stopped dead in her tracks. Before her, the land dropped away into a shallow valley. And there, spreading across the valley floor like a living thing, was something that made her heart sink into her stomach. A camp. Dozens of teepees arranged in careful circles. Smoke rising from morning fires. Horses grazing nearby in organized herds. And walking toward her, silhouetted against the rising sun, was a tall figure wearing a feathered headdress. She had escaped one nightmare only to run directly into another. Sarah's legs refused to move. Every story she had ever heard about wild Indians flooded her mind at once. Scalping. Torture. Captivity. The newspapers back east had been full of such tales. The women at the trading post had whispered them like ghost stories designed to frighten children into obedience. And now she stood frozen, watching as the figure approached with steady, unhurried steps that spoke of confidence and power. Run, her mind screamed. But where? Behind her was Thomas and his rage. Before her was the unknown. Her body had reached its limit anyway. 3 years of poor food and constant fear had left her weak. The desperate flight through the night had drained whatever reserves remained. The figure drew closer. In the growing light, she could see him more clearly now. He was tall and powerfully built, his copper skin marked with scars that spoke of battles survived and wisdom earned. The feathered headdress marked him as someone important. A chief, perhaps. His face was stern, unreadable as carved stone. In his hand, he carried a staff decorated with beads and feathers that caught the morning light. Sarah dropped to her knees. She didn't know if this was the proper thing to do, but her legs had given out anyway. The burlap sack fell from her grip, spilling its meager contents onto the grass. Tears streaked through the dirt on her face, leaving clean tracks down her cheeks. Her whole body shook with exhaustion and terror. "Please," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Please, I just want to live." The chief stopped a few paces away. His dark eyes studied her with an intensity that made her feel transparent, as if he could see every secret, every wound, every moment of suffering she had endured. When he finally spoke, his voice was deep and carried the weight of authority that came from years of leadership. "Stand up." She understood the tone even before the words fully registered in her mind. She struggled to her feet, swaying slightly, her vision blurring at the edges. Up close, she could see that he was older than she had first thought. Gray streaked through his long black hair like silver threads. Lines creased the corners of his eyes, the kind that came from years of squinting into the sun and bearing the weight of difficult decisions. But those eyes held a sharpness that age had not dimmed. He circled her slowly, taking in every detail with the careful assessment of someone who had learned to read people for survival. Her torn dress. Her bleeding feet in their worn boots that were never meant for running across miles of prairie. The knife she still clutched uselessly in her shaking hand. The bruises on her arms that no amount of dirt could hide. When he completed his circle and faced her again, he reached out his hand. Sarah flinched violently, an involuntary response born from 3 years of conditioning. She couldn't help it. Her body remembered what her mind tried to forget. Something flickered across his face. Something that looked almost like recognition. "The knife," he said quietly. "Give it to me." She had no choice, and they both knew it. With trembling fingers, she placed the kitchen knife in his outstretched palm. He examined it briefly, turning it over in his hands, noting its dull blade and worn handle. Then he tucked it into his belt without comment. Then, to her complete shock, he removed a leather water skin from his shoulder and held it out to her. The gesture was so unexpected that for a moment she could only stare. "Drink." She hesitated, certain this was some kind of trick. But her thirst was overwhelming. Her tongue felt like leather in her mouth. She took the water skin with both hands and drank deeply. The water was cool and clean, the best thing she had ever tasted. She had to force herself to stop before she made herself sick. The chief watched her drink, then made a gesture toward the camp with his staff. The feathers attached to it danced in the morning breeze. "Come." Sarah wanted to refuse, but what choice did she have? "You run from someone. A man. I see his marks on you," he said, pointing at her bruised arms. "You are far from white man's town. Alone. No horse. No food. You will die here within 2 days." Sarah's throat tightened with emotion. "I'd rather die free than go back to him." Something shifted in the chief's expression. For the first time, she saw something other than stern authority in those dark eyes. It was brief, just a flash, but it looked like understanding. Like pain. Like a wound that had never properly healed. "I am Standing Bear," he said, each word deliberate and weighted with meaning. "Chief of my people. We are Lakota. We do not harm those who come in need." He paused, and his next words were careful, measured. "Especially those who flee from men with cruel hearts." Sarah wanted to believe him, but fear had been her companion for too long. "What do you want from me?" Standing Bear's jaw tightened. "My people know what it means to be hunted. To be beaten by those with more power. To have everything taken from you while others watch and do nothing. We were forced from our land by white soldiers. Forced to walk far from the graves of our ancestors. Many died on that walk. Many suffer still from what we lost." A woman emerged from one of the nearby teepees. She was elderly, her face lined with years of joy and sorrow, wearing a dress decorated with intricate beadwork. She approached and spoke rapidly to Standing Bear in their language. The words flowed like music, rising and falling in patterns Sarah couldn't understand but found strangely beautiful. Standing Bear responded, gesturing to Sarah. The woman's expression softened immediately. She stepped forward and gently took Sarah's arm, examining the bruises with a healer's practiced eye. "This is Mourning Dove," Standing Bear explained, his voice gentler now. "She is our medicine woman. She will tend to your wounds and give you food and rest." Sarah felt the world beginning to spin. The terror, the exhaustion, the sheer impossibility of everything that had happened was finally overwhelming her completely. "I don't understand. Why are you helping me? You don't know me. You don't owe me anything." Standing Bear's eyes grew distant, as if seeing something from long ago. A memory that still had the power to hurt. "Because once, many seasons past, I could not help someone who needed it. Someone like you. Someone running from cruelty. And she died because I was not there. Because I was too late. Because I believed the white man's promises that she would be safe." Mourning Dove began leading Sarah toward the camp with gentle pressure on her arm. Sarah looked back at Standing Bear, confusion and gratitude warring in her chest. "He will come looking for me," she said, her voice breaking. "Thomas. My husband. He'll bring men with guns and horses. He'll bring violence to your people." Standing Bear's expression turned to stone. He planted his staff in the earth with a thud that spoke of finality and resolve. The sound echoed across the valley like a declaration of war. "Let him come." Thomas Whitmore kicked over the table, sending dishes crashing to the floor in an explosion of broken pottery and spilled food. The sound echoed through the empty trading post like gunfire. His bloodshot eyes swept the room again, as if Sarah might somehow materialize from the shadows if he looked hard enough. But she was gone. That ungrateful, worthless woman had actually run. After everything he had given her. A roof over her head. Food in her belly. His name. "I'll kill her," he muttered, reaching for the whiskey bottle with a hand that shook with rage. "I'll drag her back here by her hair and teach her what happens to wives who forget their place." He had spent the last hour searching every corner of the post and the surrounding area, growing more furious with each empty space he discovered. Her tracks led west into the plains, but they were impossible to follow in the darkness. Now, with dawn breaking across the horizon like a bloody wound, he could see just how far the empty grassland stretched. She could be anywhere out there in that vast emptiness. But she wouldn't survive long alone. No water except what she carried. No food. No protection from the elements or wild animals. The frontier killed strong men regularly. It would make quick work of a foolish woman who thought she could escape her obligations. Unless someone found her first. Thomas took a long pull from the bottle, the whiskey burning his throat, and began gathering supplies with rough, angry movements. His rifle. 2 boxes of ammunition. Rope, plenty of rope for when he found her. He saddled his horse with hard yanks on the leather straps, taking out his frustration on the animal. The horse shifted nervously, sensing his mood, its eyes rolling white. Thomas had bought Sarah for $200 through a mail-order bride service and a promise of marriage. She was his property, legally and morally. The law said so. God said so. Any man who interfered would face the consequences of crossing Thomas Whitmore. He was about to mount when he heard hoofbeats approaching from the east. 2 riders appeared over the rise, Bill Henderson and Jack Price, fellow traders who ran the post 15 miles north. They were rough men, weathered by years on the frontier, who shared Thomas's views on women and the proper order of things. "Whitmore." Bill called out, reining in his horse in a cloud of dust. "What's got you up so early? You look like hell warmed over." Thomas spat on the ground. "My wife ran off. Sometime in the night. Ungrateful wretch." Jack laughed, a cruel sound that held no real humor. "A runner? Hell, Thomas, you should have kept her locked up better. Can't trust women to know what's good for them." "I need help tracking her," Thomas said, his voice rough. "She headed west into the prairie. Could be anywhere by now. Could be dead already for all I know." Bill's expression grew serious, the laughter dying on his lips. "West? That's Lakota territory out there. Standing Bear's band camped somewhere in that direction. Saw their scouts last week." Thomas felt ice form in his stomach, cold and heavy. "Indians?" Bill nodded grimly. "Not just any Indians. Standing Bear's people. They're supposed to be peaceful now, signed the treaties and all that. But they're unpredictable. Got their own ideas about justice and law. If your wife stumbled into their camp." He left the sentence unfinished, but the implication hung in the air like smoke. A new emotion joined Thomas's rage, fear. Not for Sarah, but for himself and what this meant. He knew the stories that circulated among the settlers. Tales of people who ventured too close to Indian camps and sometimes never returned. Tales of warriors who didn't respect white authority or white law. But the thought of Sarah finding shelter with them, of her escaping his authority through the protection of savages, was unbearable. Intolerable. She was his. The law and God and nature said so. "I'm going after her," Thomas declared, his voice gaining strength from his conviction. "She's my legal wife under white man's law and God's law. They got no right to keep her." Jack and Bill exchanged meaningful glances, some unspoken communication passing between them. "You sure about that?" Jack asked carefully. "Standing Bear don't recognize white man's law. Word is he's got his own ideas about justice." Thomas snarled, his hand tightening on his rifle. "I don't care about his ideas or his code. She's mine, and I'm bringing her back. Dead or alive. You two coming or not?" The promise of excitement and possible violence was enough. Bill nodded slowly. "Sure, why not? But we better bring more men. Just in case things get ugly." By mid-morning, Thomas had assembled a group of 6 men, all armed and mounted on their best horses. They were traders and settlers who had their own reasons for disliking Indians and their own grievances against the tribes. Some had lost property in raids years ago. Others simply carried the prejudice common among frontier whites who saw the native people as obstacles to progress. All of them agreed that a man had the right to retrieve his runaway wife, no matter who was harboring her. No matter what laws or customs stood in the way. They followed Sarah's tracks westward across the rolling prairie. The trail was easy to read in the daylight, erratic, desperate, the footprints of someone fleeing in panic without care for covering their path. Thomas felt a savage satisfaction building in his chest. She had been terrified. Good. She would be even more terrified when he found her. When he showed her the consequences of defiance. Around noon, they spotted the Lakota camp in the valley below. It was larger than Thomas had expected, sprawling across the valley floor. At least 30 teepees, maybe more, arranged in traditional circles. Horses grazed in organized herds nearby. People moved about their daily tasks. Children played near the creek that ran through the center. It looked almost peaceful, like a scene from a painting. But Thomas saw only an obstacle between him and what was his. "That's a lot of Indians," one of the men muttered, his confidence wavering. "Didn't expect so many." Thomas took another pull from his flask, needing the courage that whiskey provided. "Doesn't matter. We're here under the law. We're not looking for trouble. Just getting back what's mine." They rode down slowly, rifles ready but not raised, trying to project confidence they didn't entirely feel. As they approached, warriors began to emerge from the camp, forming a loose line between the white men and the teepees. They were armed with bows, lances, and a few rifles that looked well maintained. Their faces were impassive, giving nothing away. Then the line parted like a curtain, and Standing Bear walked through. He wore his full regalia now, the feathered headdress, a beaded vest that caught the sunlight, ceremonial paint on his face in patterns Thomas didn't understand. He looked like something from another time, ancient and powerful and utterly unbending. He stopped 20 paces from the riders and planted his staff in the ground with deliberate force. Thomas dismounted, forcing bravado into his voice that he didn't feel in his bones. "I'm Thomas Whitmore. I'm looking for my wife. She ran away last night. I have reason to believe she came this way." Standing Bear's expression remained neutral, unreadable as stone. "What does this wife look like?" The question was simple, but Thomas sensed a trap in it. Tall. Brown hair. Wearing a blue dress, probably torn up now. "She's got a few bruises, but that's none of your concern. That's between a husband and wife. She's my wife, legal and proper, and I want her back." Standing Bear asked quietly, "Why did she run?" His tone was casual, conversational, but his eyes were hard as flint. Thomas felt his face flush with anger and embarrassment. "That's between me and her. Private matters. Now, is she here or not?" Standing Bear was silent for a long moment. The warriors behind him stood perfectly still, like coiled springs waiting to be released. The only sound was the wind moving through the grass and the nervous shifting of horses sensing the tension. Finally, Standing Bear spoke, and his words fell like hammer blows. "She is here. She came to us seeking protection. We have given it." Thomas's hand moved toward his rifle. Bill grabbed his arm, stopping him. The warriors had tensed, ready to respond to any threat. You got no right, Thomas said, his voice rising. She's my legal wife under white man's law. Standing Bear's laugh was bitter. White man's law? The same law that took our land? The same law that breaks every treaty? Your law means nothing here. Thomas threatened, then we'll take her by force. Standing Bear replied calmly, you can try. But look around you. Count my warriors. Count your men. Think carefully about what happens next. Thomas looked. There were at least 20 warriors now, with more emerging from the camp. His 6 men suddenly seemed very small. This isn't over, Thomas spat. I'll be back with more men. With soldiers if I have to. Then I will be waiting, Standing Bear said. His voice grew colder. But know this, the woman who came to us was not running toward something. She was running from something. From you. I have seen her bruises. I know what kind of man you are. Thomas felt rage boiling over. You got no idea what you're talking about. Standing Bear took a step forward. Don't I? I know the look in her eyes. The same look my sister had when her white husband beat her until she could no longer stand. Until one day she did not wake up at all. I could not save her. But I will save this one. The silence that followed was absolute. Thomas knew, in that moment, that he had miscalculated everything. This wasn't about law or rights or property. This was about something deeper, something more dangerous. We're leaving, Bill said quietly, already backing his horse away. Come on, Thomas. This isn't worth dying over. Thomas wanted to argue, to make one more threat. But the look in Standing Bear's eyes stopped him. It wasn't hatred. It was something far more frightening, absolute conviction. The white men turned their horses and rode away. But Thomas looked back once. Standing Bear still stood there, staff planted in the earth, watching them go. This wasn't over. Sarah sat inside Mourning Dove's teepee, wrapped in a blanket made from soft buffalo hide. Her feet had been cleaned and bandaged. A poultice of herbs had been applied to her bruises. The medicine woman worked with gentle efficiency, humming softly as she tended to wounds both visible and invisible. Through the opening of the teepee, Sarah had watched the confrontation between Standing Bear and Thomas. She had seen her husband's face twisted with rage, had heard his threats even from this distance. Fear had gripped her heart like an icy fist. She knew what Thomas was capable of. She knew he would never stop hunting her. But she had also seen something else, Standing Bear's unwavering stance. The chief had not flinched. Had not backed down. Had not treated her like property to be negotiated over. For 3 years, she had forgotten what it felt like to have someone stand up for her. Mourning Dove said something in Lakota, breaking Sarah's thoughts. When Sarah looked at her with confusion, the old woman smiled and switched to English. Her accent was thick but her words were clear. You are safe here. Standing Bear has declared it. His word is law among our people. But Thomas will come back, Sarah said, her voice breaking. He'll bring more men. I've seen him rally the other traders before. They'll attack the camp because of me. People will die because I ran. Mourning Dove sat back, studying Sarah with eyes that had seen many seasons. You think yourself responsible for the hatred of violent men? You give yourself too much power. She poured tea from a small pot warming by the fire. Drink. It will calm your spirit. Sarah accepted the cup with trembling hands. The tea was bitter but warming. I don't understand why you're helping me. Standing Bear mentioned his sister. What happened to her? The old woman's face grew sad. White Fawn was Standing Bear's youngest sister. Beautiful and kind. 10 winters ago, a white trader came through our lands. He spoke sweet words. Promised to take her to his settlement, to give her a good life. Standing Bear did not trust him, but White Fawn was young and believed in the goodness of people. Sarah's heart sank. She knew how this story ended. The trader took her to his post, Mourning Dove continued. At first, letters came. She said she was happy. Then the letters stopped. Standing Bear rode to find her, but he was too late. The trader's men turned him away at gunpoint. They said she had died of fever. But he saw the fear in their eyes. He knew the truth, Mourning Dove said quietly. She was beaten. Sarah whispered the words Mourning Dove wouldn't say. The old woman nodded. We believe so. When Standing Bear finally saw her body, prepared for burial by the white women, they could not hide all the marks. His sister had died alone, far from her people, at the hands of a man who claimed to love her. Since that day, Standing Bear has sworn that no woman fleeing violence will be turned away from our camp. Not white, Not Lakota, not anyone. He calls it his sister's law. Tears streamed down Sarah's face. I'm so sorry. Mourning Dove said firmly, do not apologize for the crimes of others. You ran to save your life. That is not weakness. That is strength. White Fawn never had the chance to run. You honor her memory by surviving. Outside, the camp was returning to normal activities. Children's laughter rang out. Women called to each other as they worked. Men tended to horses and weapons. Life continued, as it always did, even in the shadow of potential violence. Standing Bear entered the teepee, ducking through the opening. His presence seemed to fill the entire space. He looked at Sarah, and she saw the same pain she had glimpsed earlier. The pain of someone who carried loss like a physical weight. Your husband has left, he said. But he will return. He is the kind of man who cannot accept defeat. Sarah replied, I know. I'm sorry I've brought trouble to your people. Standing Bear sat down, removing his headdress. Without it, he looked more human, more accessible. But no less powerful. Trouble was already here. It has been here since the first white settlers crossed into our lands. One more fight changes nothing. What will you do when he comes back? Sarah asked. Standing Bear said, that depends on him. If he comes with soldiers, with an army, we will have to negotiate. We cannot fight the whole white nation. We have learned that lesson in blood. But if he comes with just traders and settlers, thinking to take you by force, he will learn what Lakota justice means. Sarah felt a chill. I don't want people to die because of me. Standing Bear said quietly, people are already dying. My people die slowly on reservations, forbidden to hunt, forbidden to live as we always have. We die from white man's diseases, white man's whiskey, white man's broken promises. One more fight, one more stand, maybe it means nothing. Or maybe it means everything. Maybe it reminds us that we are still Lakota. That we still have honor. Mourning Dove placed her hand on Sarah's shoulder. He does not speak of revenge. He speaks of choice. Of choosing when to bend and when to stand firm. You have given him a reason to stand firm. Sometimes, that is a gift. Sarah looked between the two of them, overwhelmed by the complexity of what she had stumbled into. She had run from one kind of captivity only to become the catalyst for a conflict she never wanted. Yet here, in this teepee, with these people who owed her nothing, she felt something she hadn't felt in years, valued. Protected. Human. Teach me, she said suddenly. Teach me about your people. Your ways. If I'm going to be here, if people are going to risk themselves for me, I want to understand why. I want to be worthy of it. Standing Bear looked surprised. Then, slowly, he smiled. It was the first time Sarah had seen him smile, and it transformed his entire face. He looked younger, lighter. Tomorrow, he said. Tomorrow, Mourning Dove will begin teaching you. Our language, our customs, our history. But tonight, you rest. You have been running for a long time, Sarah Whitmore. Here, you can stop running. That night, Sarah lay on the soft buffalo robes Mourning Dove had prepared for her. She listened to the sounds of the camp settling down for sleep. Voices murmuring in Lakota. A baby crying, then being soothed. A man singing a soft, haunting song. Dogs barking at some distant sound. She thought about Thomas, probably drinking himself into a rage at the trading post. She thought about the life she had left behind, the years of fear and pain. She thought about Standing Bear's sister, White Fawn, who had never escaped. And for the first time in 3 years, Sarah cried, not from fear or pain, but from relief. She had survived. She was safe, at least for now. And tomorrow, she would begin learning how to be something she had almost forgotten how to be. She would learn how to be free. 3 days passed in an uneasy peace. Thomas did not return, and the camp began to relax its guard. Sarah spent her time with Mourning Dove, learning basic Lakota words and helping with daily tasks. The women of the camp had been wary at first, but Mourning Dove's acceptance opened doors. They taught Sarah how to prepare buffalo hide, how to collect specific herbs, how to braid hair in their style. The children were less cautious than their parents. They giggled at Sarah's clumsy pronunciation and delighted in teaching her their games. A little girl named Bright Star had adopted Sarah completely, taking her hand and leading her around the camp like a prized possession. Through the children's eyes, Sarah began to see the Lakota not as the fearsome savages of newspaper stories but as families trying to survive in an increasingly hostile world. Standing Bear kept his distance but watched over everything. Sarah would catch glimpses of him throughout each day, consulting with his warriors, settling disputes between families, standing alone on the ridge overlooking the valley. He carried the weight of his people's future on his shoulders, and it showed in the lines around his eyes. On the morning of the fourth day, everything changed. A young warrior named Swift Arrow came riding hard into camp, his horse lathered with sweat. He shouted something in Lakota, and the entire camp erupted into action. Warriors grabbed weapons. Women began gathering children. Mourning Dove's face went pale. "What is it?" Sarah asked, fear rising in her throat. "Your husband," Mourning Dove said grimly. "He comes with many men. 20, maybe more." Sarah's legs nearly gave out. This was her fault. All of it. She had brought this violence to people who had shown her nothing but kindness. "I have to go with him. I have to stop this." Mourning Dove grabbed her arm with surprising strength. "No. You go to him now, and everything Standing Bear stands for dies with you. You think he will let you live after this humiliation? You will be dead within a week, and Standing Bear's honor will be ashes." Standing Bear strode toward them, already dressed for war. He had painted his face with black and red symbols. His expression was calm, but his eyes burned within a fire. "Sarah, go to my teepee. Stay there no matter what you hear. Do you understand?" Sarah protested, "I can't let you fight because of me." Standing Bear replied, "This stopped being about you 2 days ago. Now it is about whether a Lakota chief can be ordered around by white traders. Whether we still have the right to offer sanctuary. Whether we are still free people or just prisoners waiting for our cage to be built." He turned to Swift Arrow and issued rapid orders in Lakota. Warriors mounted their horses. Others took positions around the camp's perimeter. It was organized chaos, the product of a people who had survived by knowing how to fight. Standing Bear looked back at Sarah one last time. "If I fall today, Mourning Dove will take you north to the reservation. You will have friends there. But I do not plan to fall." Then he was gone, riding toward the valley's entrance with 20 warriors at his back. Sarah watched them go, her heart in her throat. Mourning Dove pulled her toward Standing Bear's teepee, but Sarah resisted. She needed to see. She needed to witness what her freedom had cost. From the ridge, she could see Thomas and his men. He had indeed brought reinforcements, at least 20 armed men on horseback. They looked like a ragged militia, but they were well armed. Rifles glinted in the morning sun. Sarah recognized several faces, traders from nearby posts, a few settlers, even the sheriff from the distant town of Millbrook. Thomas had sold them a story about lawless Indians harboring his kidnapped wife. Standing Bear and his warriors met them in the open ground between the camp and the approaching riders. Both groups stopped about 50 yards apart. The wind carried voices, but Sarah was too far to make out individual words. She could see Thomas gesturing angrily. Standing Bear sat perfectly still on his horse, his staff planted like a flag of defiance. The standoff lasted minutes that felt like hours. Then Sarah saw something that made her blood run cold. Thomas raised his rifle. Other men did the same. They were going to start shooting. But Standing Bear didn't move. Didn't flinch. He simply sat there, staff held high, waiting. Then something remarkable happened. The sheriff, a man named Dixon, suddenly wheeled his horse around and rode back several paces. He shouted something at Thomas. Other men began lowering their rifles, looking uncertain. A heated argument erupted among the white men. Sarah could see Thomas gesturing frantically, but more men were backing away. Finally, the entire group of white men turned and rode away. Not fleeing, but not attacking either. They left slowly, deliberately, casting dark looks back at the Lakota warriors. But they left. Standing Bear remained in place until they were completely out of sight. Only then did he signal his warriors to return to camp. As they rode back, Sarah saw the tension finally leave his shoulders. Whatever had happened out there, he had won without firing a single shot. Sarah ran down from the ridge, Mourning Dove hurrying behind her. By the time she reached the returning warriors, Standing Bear was dismounting. He looked exhausted, as if the confrontation had drained years from his life. "What happened?" Sarah demanded. "Why did they leave?" Standing Bear smiled wearily. "The sheriff is not a bad man, only a weak one. I told him the truth, that you came to us fleeing violence. That any man could see the marks of abuse on your body, that taking you back would be sending you to your death. I told him that the law he claimed to represent was supposed to protect women, not return them to men who beat them." Sarah asked, "And he believed you?" Standing Bear replied, "He wanted to believe me. The other men, they wanted a fight, wanted to prove something. But the sheriff, he has daughters of his own. When I asked him what he would want for them if they came running to strangers for help, he had no answer. So I gave him a choice. Take you by force and start a war that would bring army soldiers to investigate. Or ride away and tell everyone you were never here. That you must have died in the prairie. That your cruel husband should accept his loss and move on with his life. Sarah felt tears streaming down her face. And Thomas? Standing Bear's expression hardened. Is a coward without support. Alone, he is nothing. His friends abandoned him when they realized the truth, that this was not about law or justice, but about one man's desire to control a woman. No one wanted to die for that. But he will not forget. He will hate you, and he will hate me, until the day he dies. This I know. Sarah whispered, I'm sorry. Standing Bear said, do not be. Today, we won something more important than a fight. We won by standing for what was right, not what was easy. We reminded ourselves and them that we are not beaten. Not yet. And you, Sarah Whitmore, you are free. Truly free. The white men think you are dead. Your husband will tell the story of his runaway wife who perished on the plains. You can never go back to your old life. But you can build a new one. Sarah looked around at the camp, at the people who had risked everything for a stranger. At Morning Dove, who had tended her wounds. At Bright Star, who had taken her hand. At Standing Bear, who had seen his sister in her suffering and refused to let history repeat itself. I want to stay, she said. Here. With your people. If you'll have me. Standing Bear looked surprised. You would give up the white world? Your people? Your way of life? Sarah asked, what life? I have nothing to go back to. No family. No home. No future except maybe another man like Thomas. Here, I found something I'd forgotten existed. Kindness. Honor. People who judge others by their actions, not their usefulness. I want to learn your ways. To be useful to your people. To earn the protection you've given me. Morning Dove stepped forward, speaking in Lakota. Standing Bear listened, then nodded slowly. He turned back to Sarah. Morning Dove says you have the heart of a warrior. That you did not run today but wanted to face the danger yourself. She says you will make a good Lakota woman, if you have the strength to complete the journey. Sarah said firmly, I have the strength. Standing Bear smiled, and this time it reached his eyes. Then you are welcome, Sarah. We will give you a new name. A Lakota name. One that speaks of your journey. Running Deer. Because you ran from death and found life. Sarah repeated, Running Deer. The name felt foreign on her tongue, but also right. It was a name earned through pain and courage. It was hers. That evening, the camp celebrated. Not the violence that had been avoided, but the new life that had been begun. Standing Bear formally announced Sarah's adoption into the tribe. Women came forward with gifts, a dress of soft deerskin, moccasins decorated with beads, a blanket woven with traditional patterns. As the sun set over the plains, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Sarah stood beside Standing Bear and looked out over the valley. Somewhere out there, Thomas was telling his lies, creating his version of events. But here, in this camp, the truth lived. A woman had run from cruelty and found sanctuary. A chief had stood for justice and won without bloodshed. And two worlds, so different and so often at war, had found common ground in the simple belief that no person deserved to be beaten and abused. Thank you, Sarah said quietly. For everything. Standing Bear nodded. Thank you for giving me the chance to honor my sister's memory. To prove that her death meant something. That we can be better than our worst moments. They stood together in comfortable silence, watching as the stars began to appear in the darkening sky. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. The white world and the Lakota world were on a collision course that no single act of compassion could prevent. But today, in this moment, there was peace. And for Sarah, for Running Deer, that was enough. She had escaped a house of cruelty and found a home of honor. She had run from death and found life. And though the future remained uncertain, she knew one thing with absolute clarity: she would never be a victim again. The Lakota had taught her that freedom was not given but taken, not received but earned. And she had earned hers in full. The plains stretched endlessly before them, full of both danger and promise. But Running Deer no longer feared the emptiness. She had learned that even in the vast wilderness, you could find family. You could find purpose. You could find yourself. And that was worth any risk, any sacrifice, any challenge that lay ahead. She was home.